Cam should feel about the Flacco signing almost the exact same way that Coach felt when he heard Phillip Rivers next year was going to go coach a high school team in Alabama. Shouldn't feel snubbed, shouldn't feel badly, should feel nothing at all, because that's a job he wasn't going to take anyway. Cam Newton is not signing up to go play for $1 million to back up a guy he's better than in Sam Darnold, especially a guy who we know the Jets have immense investment in, so they're not going to move off of, and they shouldn't, by the way, move off of. So I had an odd weekend. The weather wasn't great here in New York City. We're obviously still quarantined, so it allowed me to do some things. One thing I did was I rewatched the 1993 Western Conference Finals. And by the way, Charles Barkley, oh my God, he was unbelievable in games 5 and 7. Another thing I did was I started an NBA project we're working on this show. But the last thing I did was I watched the 2017 playoff game, actually January of 2018, between the Saints and the Panthers. The last playoff game we saw Cam Newton play in, when Cam Newton was throwing to a who's who of wide receivers named Kalen Clay, Devin Funchess, and Brenton Burson. And in that playoff game, Cam Newton was leading the Panthers back through a perfect pass with less than 30 seconds left into the front corner of the end zone to win the game. And Devin Funchess, the best wide receiver on his team, could not get his head turned around. The very next year, with his new throwing motion, can we show it? Here's how Cam Newton got that year going, with one of the best starts to a season we've seen in recent times. 60% completions, 2 touchdowns, 11 games in a row he put up those numbers. Only Tom Brady and only Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes have done it even 9. Only Aaron Rodgers and Peyton Manning have done it more than Cam. That's the list. That was not Cam's MVP year. That was the last time he was healthy. And then that year, until his shoulder went out on him, he had like a 104 rating, 26 total touchdowns, 7 picks. He was playing some of his best football of his life. Then his shoulder goes out on him. He breaks his foot in the preseason, and we haven't seen him since. And so, Wildes, no, Cam shouldn't be upset Joe Flacco got a backup or third-string quarterback job, because Cam Newton should be waiting for a starting quarterback job. At least that's what his play the last time we saw him healthy says.
I agree, Nick. And just a quick note, since there's not a ton of live sports, a lot of people have been betting on talk shows and what will be mentioned. So a big day in Vegas if you had the 1993 Western Conference Finals coming up and a Cam Newton question from Nick Wright. So congratulations to everyone that had money on that. Big win for you guys. The interesting thing about the starting roles, Nick, is I asked Dusty to pull up. I said, hey, how many teams had a plan that worked throughout the season? If we can throw up the graphic, half of the teams changed their starting quarterback, not permanently, but had someone else start from who they had planned on week 1. And they basically fall into 4 categories. Injury, right? Poor play. The future is now, where it's like the Giants, like, hey, let's just go. Or the future is the past, which is like, the future's not now, let's go back to our guy. Little interesting note, the Jags and the Redskins hit for the cycle, all 4. So the question to you, Coach, is, I know we're saying that like Cam doesn't want the Jets job, he should want to waltz right into a starting job, but from that graphic, it seems to me that half of those jobs could become starting jobs. Not all of them, obviously he's not going to go and take, Patrick Mahomes' job. But when you look at what happened in New Orleans, hey, I'm the backup and now I'm a starter for somewhere else. Doesn't Cam just want to get on a team?
Well, first of all, Nick, your weekend is a little too wild for me. You better slow down. You're going to burn out. And it would be fantastic if you could look at past video and suddenly be transported into that player that was in that video. But that's unfortunately not how it works. He's only started or I think started 10 games over the last 2 years. And the injury question is real. And not just the injury question, but he talks about changing his throwing motion and how he's committed to doing that. Whether or not that can really happen is also a question mark. And whether that can happen when he's under pressure and stress, that's an even bigger question mark, because you usually default to what you know. But to your question, Kevin, should he wait? Yeah, at this point, to sign for $1.5 million like Flacco did with $4 million in incentives It's not a great deal. People are going to get to training camp and realize that the quarterback that they have isn't the quarterback that they hope to have, or someone's going to get injured, and Cam's going to get an opportunity that's dramatically different than the opportunity that's available now. So keep working out, keep improving your throwing motion, keep working on the things that you want to work on, and an opportunity will come along that's better than what's available right now.
All right, Nick, Coach does have a point. I mean, we're in strange, odd times now where players can't be brought in to work out. Maybe the injury, the health issue is a big question mark for teams. But put all that aside, what happens now? How do you see this all playing out?
Yeah, I think Cam waits until there is a better option than the ones that currently present themselves. And I'm going to push back a bit on a few things. One is the throwing motion. He retooled his throwing motion going into the 2018 season. And that year, he was completing 70% of his passes, was having the best year since his MVP season until he got hurt. And he started, by the way, 14 games that year. It's just at the very end, they shut it down. In the last month and a half, he wasn't effective because of the shoulder. And then in the preseason, he got his foot broken. The question is, to me, not about the shoulder. His shoulder was fine in the preseason last year. It was he broke his foot, and you can't play this position, whether you can't play any position in the NFL, but certainly not quarterback, not because Cam's a runner, but because you need your feet to set yourself in the pocket with a broken foot. So we're in an era where quarterbacks are talking about playing until 40. And Cam is being seemingly forgotten about at age 31. And so if I were advising him, the benefit of not being on a team is you are not tied to a certain situation, because there will be inevitable injuries, because there will be inevitable underachievement. You can wait for that, as opposed to, like, we look at the Saints situation and say it worked out great for Teddy Bridgewater, and it did. But if Brian Hoyer last year, for example, was looking for a similar opportunity, didn't work out for him at all. He was behind an aging quarterback who didn't miss any time. The Chargers, even though Phillip Rivers played poorly, doesn't miss any time. And so I think it is incumbent upon Cam Wildes to wait and see what happens, and to see what the level of interest in him is once the world opens back up. So I don't think the Flacco thing should bother him. I do think the Bears trading for Foles, that would irk me. The Colts signing Phillip Rivers, if I'm Cam, I don't love that. But I think you have to wait and see where there is an opening, because Cam Newton is not a backup quarterback in 2020, Wildes.
So are we just taking the health off the board? Coach, everyone's like, well, we don't know if he's healthy. It's Corona. We're quarantined. We can't get anybody checked out. And then Joe Flacco had neck surgery last month, and he's being signed. So is this injury thing a real thing, or is it more of just an excuse?
No, it's definitely a real thing. And every organization has different thresholds for evaluating injuries. And maybe the Jets were able to arrange something with Flacco where he was able to get the X-rays or the exams that they need him to get. But to Nick's point, to say that Cam Newton isn't a runner, well, I don't think anybody would agree with that. That's one of the things that Cam Newton does especially well. That's one of the things that makes him as dangerous as he is. So you've got that aspect of it. And the throwing motion part is whether you can maintain that motion as adversity continues to strike, as you go through tough times. Are you going to stay with the throwing motion that you've adopted, or are you going to go back to the motion that's made you successful year in and year out? And you don't have that answer with Cam. In addition, Cam is a star, whether we want to agree or admit that or not, he is. And he comes with a lot to him when you bring him into the building. And there has to be an element on his part of willing to be a backup, willing to accept that role. And if he's not willing, then stay unsigned and wait for that opportunity to go in and be the starter.
Yeah, if I said Cam's not a runner, obviously that's not what I meant. I'm not sure I said that. My point was, I think people were looking at the broken foot as if the particular reason that was bad for Cam is because he's a mobile quarterback. There is not a quarterback in the league that would be successful with the foot injury Cam had last year. The foot injury prevented him from being able to throw to a single side of the field because he couldn't plant his feet. That's the point I was making. But with Cam, it's always more than meets the eye, because Wildes is right. Other guys can get signed with questionable medical checks. Other guys can get signed despite being awful for 5 years, as Flacco was before the Broncos traded for him. With Cam, there's an additional level to this, which is he continues to be one of the most polarizing players in the league for reasons I don't totally understand, unless you are just adamant that he shouldn't have probably taken money at Auburn a decade ago. So there are at least a dozen fan bases right now who would be thrilled if they woke up tomorrow morning and their team had signed Cam Newton and they would roll the dice on the injury stuff. I'm very curious to see which team ends up doing it, Jenna.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.